So here we finally have the end of Ultimate Spider-Man as a whole, and to be honest, I'm kind of conflicted because on one hand, yes, it does bring a definitive end, but there are just so many more cards still left on the table. But I'm AJ here at the Hero Informer, and let's get into it. And even though this is the end and coming to a conclusion, the stakes are still incredibly high. Spider-Man's son Richard and Black Cat are, on their deathbed against an unstoppable rogue AI, Harry Osborn, the Green Goblin, and his wife, or entity of a wife, as we'll see what's happening with her, because Mysterio is kind of a new being altogether, them making deals and controlling New York as a whole, and of course Spider-Man here fighting Kingpin and Mr. Negative to the death, as we're going to soon see later, because yes, things get very deadly and hairy for a lot of characters. With Peter specifically going on to say, gearing up for the fight of his life, and even knowing that his children, his son is down there fighting for his own life, he is not holding anything back, because as you would know, when you mess with Peter's family or his family is in danger, that's when you get the no holding back, no card still on the table version of Peter, as he goes on to say, well, are we going to end this thing or not? And even his determination, even through the beating and loss that he has occurred through this entire run so far, Mr. Negative has to give Peter his props, going on to say that I have to give him some credit. This is how a man should die. And then going on to ask Kingpin that should he release his powers over Peter, his mind abilities being able to take over the weak-willed individuals of whoever can hear his voice and whoever he's under the command of, because he even goes on to continue saying, doesn't he deserve to die with the honor of being allowed to fight back? Of course, referring to Spider-Man, but Kingpin has a different opinion about this, as he goes on to say, no, everywhere I go, I am surrounded by people trying to tear me down. I have no interest in a fair fight or grand gestures of respect. He doesn't want to give Spider-Man the satisfaction of a fair battle for his life. He wants to be able to beat the man to death to end this once and for all, because the world is a cruel place, and Kingpin doesn't like to play fair. He wants his enemies dead and all of his scores settled. So Mr. Negative goes on to do just that, using his abilities that, as we have seen previously, just completely take over the people that it's directed at. Once he gives a command, they are almost certainly forced, or more accurately, compelled to a very strong degree to listen and do it. As he goes on to tell Peter, not only do not fight, but don't even move. And the very cool part about this is Spider-Man just kind of ignores it, as he goes on to do the exact things that he's not supposed to, fighting and moving. But maybe it's because of the suit, the mask is covering his ears, and maybe he needs to hear it directly. Or more likely scenario, Spider-Man's willpower is just that strong and so high, especially under this situation where if Peter dies here, that's the end of not only him, his family, his son downstairs, but even MJ and the rest of everything that he was trying to do in this Ultimate Universe. As he goes on to web Mr. Negative, throwing him in front of Wilson Fisk as he charges in, saying, this isn't me fighting, this is me just lovingly moving you from one place to another, as the Kingpin just one-shots Mr. Negative, downing him here, leaving Wilson and Peter in a 1v1 to settle things permanently, as they charge towards each other and Spider-Man being able to stop his fist with one hand, which is already a bigger and better showing than he did previously, where Wilson Fisk kind of just dominated Spider-Man in their first encounter. And even down below with the kids, as Richard Parker and Felicia, the Black Cat, the stakes down there are equally as high and deadly, as they're trying to break into the vault to put the special piece of technology that will shut down the Maker's security node around New York, so not only can I get access to certain information, but also wipe information about the heroes from the Maker's system permanently. But something like that is obviously going to be super well guarded, as this white stuff that is evolving and capturing them is highly advanced, as the black suit, the Picotech suit that Richard has, or Venom, if you will. It goes on to tell him that this stuff, this substance, is extremely complex and highly adaptable. But the good news is, Venom here is even more complex and more adaptable, as he is finally fully transformed and able to free the duo momentarily, being able to create a wall and blockage from the stuff so it doesn't keep, attacking them. But for Felicia to be able to get the device inside of the Maker's node, they're going to need a minute that they're most likely not going to get unscathed, as just in the little bits and pieces of this highly advanced anti-Picotech, whatever you want to call it, starts coming back. Because as Richard's suit, the Picotech, or Venom, which I'm just going to refer to him as that for now, it goes on to say that the defense matrix, the white stuff, is digging around in his very own source code, and it's changing, evolving, becoming more like them, as it fully forms and almost becomes an anti-Venom to the Picotech's Venom here, which is super cool and interesting, and is something that Peter and Kingpin are watching while they have their battle, them fighting for their lives against this monstrosity of a beast down below. Though Kingpin, on the other hand, sees this as nothing more than entertainment, a great Darwinism test. Fisk himself says that he's betting on technology and the future instead of humanity this time. He just doesn't see Peter's son and the traitor, Black Cat, Felicia Hardy, making it out of this one alive. But regardless of that, Peter came very specifically prepared for this battle with Kingpin here, pulling out a device that was made specifically by Dr. Octavius and Harry Osborn to finally be able to level the playing field once and for all and take Kingpin out if the time ever arrived for it. As you know, those circles all over his body and weird little tattoo markings that have never really been addressed until right now, yeah, they're kind of like biotech running all throughout his body, empowering him and making him go from peak human and just really strong fat boy to very comfortably superhuman in abilities. But the serum here is able to negate that and turn him back into, baseline Wilson Fisk, who Spider-Man is going to have no problem just trancing over if he's able to inject him with it, which is the exact thing we see Peter try to do here, lunging to stab Wilson, as the enhancements, the biotech, is just not only empowering him even further, but giving him these almost electric and energy coursing off of his very body. As he punches Spider-Man away and makes him drop the device, he goes on to tell him that this is his favorite part, that most men in Kingpin's position would be annoyed by his enemies refusing to surrender and keep this hopeless battle that is only truly going to end one way. But Kingpin, on the other hand, he loves this. The final death of hope, the crushing of dreams, the surrendering to the weight of living in this unfair world. And more specifically, the very end of Peter's bloodline, him and his son, and going on to mean the rest of his family, his wife, his other daughter, by his very own hand. Which that's assuming that the things in a vault down below, the anti-venoms, if you will, take him out first, because we've seen what happened before when Wilson Fisk tried to fight Venom or Richard in the suit. It did not go well for him or any of the other Sinister Six that were there present. And even here in the moment, Venom is just completely riled up in almost 10 times his usual size as he just bites down and rips the head off of one of the anti-venoms, meaning individually they're not too strong or that powerful, but there's just so many of them and it's almost an endless stream, as Venom even goes on to say. The goo, all of that white stuff, it is them. And he suspects that the entire structure of this vault is the same nanotech that these anti-venom things are made out of, and they would just keep recreating. So they either need to make a run for it, or they have to get that device hooked into the system inside of the vault so they can essentially become invisible to the system. And obviously, being the son of Peter Parker, Richard here is going to make the sacrifice play if he has to, with him even going on to say, if they push forward, yes, they could die and it's dangerous, but if they're successful, this means saving mom, saving dad, May, his sister. So it is very much worth the risk as they go forward with it. In which, Peter understands it, but he's very not happy about watching his son go further into what could be certain death. But Kingpin goes on to say and make a very specific promise, saying, I want to make you a promise, Spider-Man, one I swear to keep. When I bury you and your son's bodies, I will do so in unmarked graves on opposite sides of the earth, symbolizing that they will be apart forever, just in the same way that they died. Which, believe me, that's a very harrowing threat, and if Peter wasn't just completely angry and ticked off before, he is absolutely to the max level right now. But even in the same moment, Uncle Ben and J. Jonah aren't over, broadcasting certain things that the Kingpin has done and information to the world, as they just then send the last package, the last bit of information that, will essentially ruin Kingpin and expose the truth about everything going on with not only New York, but the Maker's entire underlings as a whole. With the message and broadcasting going on to say, it's hard hearing that this world is not what you once believed it was. Some people will deny it until the day they die, because simply they don't have the ears to hear it. But if you can, you should listen, because the reality is that all the power the Kingpin has is just an illusion. As we see that playing out firsthand with Spider-Man's and Wilson Fisk's battle, Spider-Man finally getting the upper hand, comparatively anyway, especially since the first time they fought, doing enough damage to literally break the Kingpin's nose. And even more than that, Peter finds the device that he dropped before, the almost antivirus or poison specifically made for Kingpin. He finds it and blitzes around his attacks and stabs him front and center, literally purging whatever enhancements or extra powers the Kingpin had, now turning him into the, big fat man that he kind of looks, but was very much more than that in any sense of the word. So yeah, Spider-Man was fighting the empowered Kingpin. So this depowered one is like a 10th of the trouble that he was before. But even as this victory rings here, there is another one down below as they finally get into the vault, special place that Felicia and Spider-Man's son were looking for. But there's also the issue of the anti-venom finally finding them and starting to fully overwhelm them, completely encasing Felicia so she can't move at all and is stuck, leaving it up to Venom or Richard here to do whatever he needs to do to save the day and their very own lives. Because as the Picotech suit or the artificial Peter in the suit goes on to say that they're being overwhelmed and it's simply going to take too long to fight off these forces and they're going to miss their window. So Richard does something very reckless, but in the moment is pretty much the only option. He detaches from the suit, in which, unlike Peter, he has no real superpowers or abilities. He's just a normal 14-year-old kid underneath the empowered suit, which even as Spider-Man just completely beat Kingpin to a bloody pulp, he's still smiling because he sees on the screen in the recording that Potentially, Richard is going to be scared to death and beat by his forces even down below. Peter even seeing the same thing as he decides to rush off, but Kingpin goes on to say that you're too late, you cannot save him. Yes, you finally won, Spider-Man, but it only cost you everything. As Peter rushes down as fast as he can, breaking open elevator doors, etc., until he finally reaches it, and it's just in the nick of time. As Richard finally gets to and activates the machine before being absolutely pulled apart and suffocated from under this mass, Peter eventually arrives and finds them just, sharing a moment in victory that they have finally done it and pretty much averted their own little crisis in and of itself. Peter saying that, you know what, at first he was terrified, but now he's feeling kind of proud of his own son. But even with this and this giant victory, he's still getting grounded for being in this place and sneaking out to do this mission in the first place. But there are many other things happening at this very moment. Fisk and Mr. Negative are getting back up from being beaten by Spider-Man. Harry Osborn, the Green Goblin, and his wife, or whatever the creature they are now, Mysterio, have made a deal with another member of the Maker's posse to take over the territory and space of New York that Fisk wind up losing, which is a necessary evil if they're going to keep any semblance of balance. But an even crazier sort of twist and wild deviation is when we pick up on the rooftop of the building, Fisk Tower. Every civilian and innocent person down below has knowledge of now the evils that Fisk has done, and his life is kind of ruined from the shadowy boss figure that he once was. But Fisk doesn't really see this as a defeat per se. Mr. Negative even going on to question him about this, asking why doesn't he seem furious about these sort of events. But Kingpin goes on to make something very clear. Yes, he will have his revenge eventually, but right now he is feeling something that he hasn't felt in a long time. He is feeling hungry. And no, not in the sense of food, as he is a pretty large man, but hungry in the sense of he now gets to start over, redo everything from the ground up. His entire empire has been exposed. He's been destroyed publicly and by the powers that be. Kingpin goes on to say that this is the thrill, the rush that he lives for, saying the idea of losing it all and then gaining it back. The hair is just standing up on his arms. He feels alive for the first time he has in years. But again, the man who he is telling this to is someone that, if he got his way, would want the death of Fisk, not for him to have to restart his journey and gain power once more. So Mr. Negative does what Mr. Negative does best, using his abilities, telling Wilson Fisk to jump, yes, commit suicide from the top of Fisk Tower. But the thing about Mr. Negative's powers are, yes, they will compel you to do an action, but if your willpower is strong enough and you are mentally strong, you can resist, which is the exact thing we see Wilson Fisk do here. As he initially jumps off, he hangs on by the skin of his teeth, as he hangs onto the ledge and grabbing onto Mr. Negative's leg, but Mr. Negative pays his no mind. If anything, he is enjoying seeing Fisk struggle, saying, do you have any idea how exciting this is for me, finally getting his revenge after all of these years of living in the Kingpin shadow. Now he even says his hair is standing up on his arms, furthering commanding Wilson Fisk to let go, just drop and die swiftly and painfully. But in a last-ditch effort before Wilson Fisk falls to his doom, he grabs on and doesn't let go of his leg, forcing both of them to fall off completely. In which, no, they don't have any other powers that could negate a fall like this. Maybe if Wilson Fisk was still enhanced to whatever degree he was before, potentially. But on the other side, Mr. Negative doesn't have any abilities that would enhance his own durability. So they both simply and quite literally splatter and die here once and for all, which is just a crazy deviation. Some of the most popular Spider-Man villains, more so Fisk than Mr. Negative anyway, but yes, they just die here. Which of course makes it to the news, the front on every paper in New York, and specifically being the paper run by J. Jonah and Ben Parker. But here's the thing, they have kind of won. They have set out to destroy Kingpin and defame him and publicize every evil he has done, and they not only succeeded in that, but now Kingpin himself is dead. What even is left for them to do? Do they just give it up and retire? They set out to do a mission and they completed it, but with the type of men that they both are, they are not the type to just give up and retire. No, they're going to keep doing this until the day they die. Though, speaking of death, and two people who have had their fair run-ins with death and both narrowly evaded it, we see the aftermath with Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy, husband and wife, or maybe just in title only. Because even as Harry goes on to ask, what are they now? The city is theirs technically, or more so Mysterio's, but what does that make them individually as people? Gwen unfortunately goes to make something very abundantly clear, that there is no more us, as they transform into this conglomerate of an entity that Mysterio now is. All of the people who were once the group now into one form, saying that no, there's no more us, Gwen Stacy and Harry Osborn, husband and wife. This was the only way they could have saved their own lives when the explosion happened, when Mr. Negative tried to assassinate them, so they are simply all one being. And yes, Gwen Stacy is in there, but she's only a small part of the giant picture, which I can only imagine what this is doing to Harry's mind, and even more so the fact that, the AI version of Norman Osborn, Harry's father, inside of the mask, has his own set of choice words and thoughts about the situation, going as far to call Harry a loser and a disappointment, and how if he wasn't already dead, then the shame itself would kill him twice over. So Harry does the very responsible and sensible thing of deciding to finally delete the AI and rendition of his father once and for all. But even still, even with him taking this new leap to try and be better, deleting his verbally abusive father past the grave and coming to terms with his new kind of or non-existent relationship with his wife, he just has one question for Peter here, going on to say and ask that the entire time that I've known you, everything was going to hell all around us, you know, little pieces being torn off bit by bit, day by day, grinding them down. But him, Peter, it seemed like the entire situation and absurdity of it never fully fazed him. You know, Peter never compromised, he never quit, he never even seemed to think about not doing what was right. So his one question is, how does Peter do it? Which in that sense, we didn't cut over to a flashback years ago where having the great responsibility, even at this point when he had no power and no great overarching purpose as he does now with Spider-Man, we see that the crazy situations that they were thrust in never started with him being bit by that spider. You know, in this case, the first moments of MJ revealing that she and Peter were having a child, which I wish we got to see more flashbacks and pieces of, you know, this lore and backstory in this universe. But, you know, this series focused on more Peter being the mature family man adult, so I get that part. But here, even in the uncertainty of them not knowing and being very early in their careers and schooling and whatever, this is where the foundation of it all starts to lay out, with MJ even being the one to propose to Peter. And even more than that, towards the end, we see Peter go on to ask MJ one more question, asking her if she thinks he's going to be a good father, a good dad. And now another time jump, this time moving forward in time past all the events that we just seen into the epilogue of all of this. You know, the family, the Parker family, finally getting back into their apartment, which the entire thing has been remodeled, and Otto Octavius has paid the entire thing off and all the damage that has occurred over the time. With the family moving back in, a couple questions arise. You know, technically neither Peter nor MJ has a job now or any income source, so they don't know if they can truly afford this long term. But it turns out Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat, the person that Richard is kind of seeing sort of, you know, her father had stashed away hundreds of millions of dollars that are all rightfully hers now, so Richard says he'll put in a good word if he's able to get ungrounded. But more importantly, the topic of what happened with Harry and what exactly did Peter tell him earlier comes up, with Mary Jane specifically asking, so what did you tell him? Peter saying that, you know, he simply told Harry what he wanted to hear, or maybe what he needed to, you know, just do the right thing no matter what and believe in something larger than yourself. Though Mary Jane correctly ascertains that that's not Peter's specific reasoning for himself, is it? In which, no. Peter says that he has spent years thinking that he has missed something in his life. And yes, he was missing something. You know, he has these gifts, these powers that were actually stolen from him by the Maker, but when he finally did get them, he learned something important. That something was missing, yes, but it wasn't what mattered, because he already had everything he truly wanted. He simply just didn't know it at the time. But now he does, as you see a shot of just mirroring the beginning when Peter first got his abilities and powers from Tony, except now it has come full circle. His entire family knowing and in on it, his son Richard now the new spider hero, or whatever you want to call him, but more importantly, putting an end to this chapter of Ultimate Spider-Man. Which, yes, as a series as a whole, had a lot of ups and downs, and maybe just a tad bit of squandered potential of where things could have gone and could have been explored. But overall, it's been a pretty fantastic ride, especially all things considered with how Spider-Man and other series has been doing recently and the more recent years. But let me know all your thoughts about Ultimate Spider-Man in this new universe, Ultimate Universe, as a whole down below. As always, this was AJ here at the Hero Informer, and thank you for watching.